If weakness were an unavoidable price of growing older, then biology would have written it clearly into our cells, our genes, and our design. Yet when we look closely, deeply at the human body, we find something far more hopeful. Muscles do not wake up one day and decide to fade simply because time has passed. They respond, adapt, remember, and rebuild. What we often call normal aging is frequently a quiet accumulation of neglect, misunderstanding, and missed signals rather than an unavoidable biological destiny. The human body is not programmed for decline. It is programmed for efficiency, conservation, and response. Muscle weakness, then, is not a sentence handed down by age, but a message, one that asks us to pay attention. Muscle weakness is often spoken about as though it were a quiet agreement between time and biology, an expectation so deeply ingrained that few people ever question it. We hear it in casual conversations, in medical waiting rooms, and even in cultural narratives about aging bodies. That strength fades because years pass, that muscles simply wear out the way old machinery does. Yet, when examined through the lens of biology, this idea begins to unravel. Muscle tissue does not follow a calendar. It follows signals. It responds to demand, to loading, to neural input, to nourishment, and to rest. The body does not measure age in birthdays. It measures experience in stressors and adaptations. When muscles weaken, it is rarely because time itself has reached a certain number, but because of mechanical and neurological conversations that once kept them vibrant have grown quiet. From the earliest stages of life, muscle exists to solve a problem. It allows movement against gravity, interaction with the environment, and survival through action. Evolution shaped muscle to be economical, not ornamental. If a muscle is not asked to contribute, the body reduces its investment in maintaining it. This is not failure, it is efficiency. Muscle fibers are metabolically expensive tissues, requiring energy, protein, and constant regulation. The body, always seeking balance, reallocates resources when a structure is no longer challenged. What we label as muscle loss with aging is often a result of years, sometimes decades, of reduced challenge rather than an intrinsic decay process. Scientific observation makes this clear in situations where age is held constant, but stimulus is changed. When younger individuals experience prolonged inactivity, whether due to injury, immobilization, or sedentary lifestyle, their muscles weaken rapidly, sometimes within weeks. Conversely, older individuals who introduce progressive resistance and movement often regain strength once thought impossible. These outcomes reveal a fundamental truth. Muscle responds to use far more faithfully than it responds to time. Aging does not switch off the machinery of adaptation. Inactivity does. The language we use matters because it shapes expectations. When weakness is framed as normal aging, it becomes invisible and unchallenged. People stop questioning it, stop investigating it, and stop intervening early. They may avoid physical effort out of fear, believing their bodies are fragile or past repair. Yet fear itself becomes another form of reduced stimulus, accelerating the very weakness it aims to avoid. Biology does not interpret fear or age. It interprets force, tension, and neural engagement. Muscles maintained under thoughtful stress remain structurally and functionally capable far longer than commonly assumed. At the cellular level, muscle fibers contain the machinery required for repair and growth throughout life. Satellite cells, protein synthesis pathways, and mitochondrial adaptation do not disappear with age. They become less active when they are not summoned. The decline is not a broken system, but a dormant one. This dormancy is often misread as inevitability. In reality, it reflects a long-term mismatch between how modern humans live and how muscle biology evolved to function. Elevators replace stairs, chairs replace squatting, screens replace movement, and convenience quietly replaces challenge. Over time, muscles interpret this environment as a signal to downsize. The distinction between aging and disuse becomes even clearer when examining populations that remain physically engaged into later decades of life. Strength does decline eventually, but its trajectory is slower, its impact less disabling, and its onset far later than expected. These observations challenge the assumption that weakness is synonymous with age. Instead, they suggest that age amplifies the consequences of inactivity, rather than causing weakness directly. Aging may narrow the margin for error, but it does not eliminate the capacity for strength. There is also a psychological dimension woven into this biological story. When people believe decline is unavoidable, motivation erodes. Effort feels futile. This belief feeds behavior, and behavior feeds biology. Muscles do not weaken in isolation. They weaken within a system of beliefs, habits, and environments. Reframing weakness as a signal rather than a verdict reopens a conversation between mind and body. It invites curiosity instead of resignation, and curiosity is often the first step toward meaningful change. Importantly, recognizing that muscle weakness is not normal aging does not deny that bodies change over time. It simply clarifies the nature of those changes. Recovery may take longer, margins may narrow, and precision may matter more, but adaptation remains possible. The body continues to listen. Muscles still respond to loading, even if the response is slower or requires more consistency. This understanding shifts focus away from fighting age and toward supporting physiology. It replaces frustration with strategy. When muscle weakness is understood as a result of reduced stimulus rather than inevitable decline, responsibility shifts, not in a way that blames individuals, but in a way that empowers them. It highlights the role of environment, education, and opportunity. It raises questions about how societies design daily life, how healthcare addresses prevention, and how early signals of weakness are interpreted. Weakness becomes a message asking for engagement, not a final chapter. Ultimately, muscle does not betray us with age. It follows instructions faithfully, even when those instructions are silence. The tragedy is not that muscles weaken, but that the weakening is often misunderstood and therefore left unaddressed. When we listen more carefully to what biology is telling us, we discover that much of what we call aging is simply adaptation to how we live. And adaptation, by its nature, can always respond to a new signal if one is finally given. Skeletal muscle is one of the most responsive tissues in the human body, yet it is often misunderstood as fragile or finite, as though its capacity to change expires with time. In reality, muscle is built around the principle of adaptability. From infancy to advanced age, it exists in a constant state of negotiation with the forces placed upon it. It listens, interprets, and adjusts. This capacity does not vanish when someone reaches a certain decade of life. What changes is not the muscle's ability to adapt, but the clarity and consistency of the signals it receives. Every time a muscle is asked to produce force, a cascade of biological events unfolds beneath conscious awareness. Mechanical tension is translated into chemical signals, which activate pathways responsible for protein synthesis and structural reinforcement. This process is not exclusive to youth. The same pathways exist in older muscle fibers, waiting to be stimulated. They may operate more slowly, require more precise conditions, or demand longer recovery, but they remain fundamentally intact. The machinery of adaptation does not retire. It becomes more selective. Scientific studies repeatedly reveal that older adults who engage in resistance-based movement can increase muscle mass, strength, and functional capacity. These improvements are not symbolic or minimal. They are measurable, meaningful, and often transformative. Such findings dismantle the assumption that muscle plasticity is age-limited. Plasticity is not an age privilege. It is a biological property. Muscle fibers do not track birthdays. They track workload. The idea of lifelong muscle adaptability is also evident in how quickly muscle responds to change, in both positive and negative directions. When movement is reduced, strength declines rapidly. When movement is reintroduced, strength begins to return. This responsiveness persists across the lifespan, reinforcing the idea that muscle remains in dialogue with behavior. It is never fully fixed. Even after periods of long inactivity, muscle tissue retains a memory of prior use, allowing it to regain function faster than expected when stimulated again. This concept of muscle memory is often misunderstood as purely neurological, but it is also structural and cellular. Muscle fibers retain nuclei acquired during earlier periods of training, which support future growth. These nuclei do not disappear with age. They serve as biological reminders of past demands, enabling muscle to rebuild when conditions improve. This means that effort invested earlier in life continues to influence muscle behavior later, but it also means that new effort can still create meaningful change. Adaptation, however, is not automatic. Muscle requires specificity. It responds to the type, intensity, and consistency of stimulus. Casual movement may preserve basic function, but strength requires challenge. This is where many people encounter frustration. They remain active but avoid resistance, believing it unsafe or unnecessary. Without sufficient mechanical load, muscles receive an incomplete signal, one that maintains movement but not strength. Over time, this gap is misinterpreted as age-related decline rather than insufficient stimulus. There's also a tendency to separate muscle from the rest of the body, as though it operates independently. In truth, muscle plasticity is deeply interconnected with sleep quality, nutrition, hormonal balance, and nervous system health. Adaptation occurs within a system, not in isolation. Older adults often experience disruptions in these supporting factors, which can blunt muscle response if not addressed. This does not negate adaptability. It emphasizes a need for a more comprehensive approach to supporting it. Fear plays a subtle but powerful role in suppressing muscle plasticity. Fear of injury, fear of pain, and fear of appearing weak often lead to avoidance of effort. This avoidance reduces exposure to the very stimuli muscles need to remain adaptable. Over time, muscles interpret caution as disuse. The resulting weakness then reinforces fear, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. Breaking this cycle requires reframing effort as information rather than threat, and recognizing that muscles are designed to learn from stress, not collapse under it. Muscle plasticity also carries a deeper implication for how we view aging itself. If muscle can continue to adapt, then aging is not defined solely by loss, but by shifting requirements. The body asks for different forms of care, more intentional movement, and better recovery, but does not ask to be abandoned. Adaptability becomes less about pushing limits and more about sustaining dialogue. Strength training in later life is not an attempt to reclaim youth, but an act of biological communication, telling the body that it is still needed, still engaged, still relevant. When muscle is understood as a lifelong adaptive tissue, the narrative of decline loses its authority. Strength becomes something that can be negotiated rather than surrendered. This perspective restores dignity to aging bodies, replacing pity with respect. It acknowledges limitations without turning them into identity. Muscle plasticity reminds us that the body is not a static object moving toward failure, but a living system responding to conditions moment by moment. The significance of this understanding extends beyond physical capability. Muscle strength influences metabolic health, balance, confidence, and independence. When muscles adapt, they support not only movement but resilience. They buffer the body against illness, injury, and instability. To assume this capacity disappears with age is to underestimate both biology and human potential. Ultimately, skeletal muscle remains open to change as long as it is alive. It does not demand perfection, only participation. It does not require youth, only relevance. When muscles are invited back into meaningful work, they respond not with resistance, but with adaptation, reaffirming that strength is not a memory of the past, but a conversation that can continue for as long as the body is willing to listen. When people think about muscle weakness, they usually imagine shrinking muscle fibers, loss of bulk, or a body that simply no longer has the material needed to produce force. What is often overlooked is that strength is not created by muscle alone. It begins in the nervous system. Every voluntary movement is initiated in the brain, transmitted to the spinal cord, refined by motor neurons, and finally expressed by muscle fibers. Long before muscle tissue shows visible signs of decline, this communication network can begin to lose clarity, precision, and intensity. In many cases, what feels like muscle weakness is actually a problem of signal, not structure. The nervous system determines how many muscle fibers are recruited, how quickly they are activated, and how well they work together. A large muscle with poor neural activation produces less force than a smaller muscle that is well coordinated. Strength, therefore, is not simply a matter of size, but of communication. As neural drive diminishes, muscles may remain physically intact yet functionally underused. This creates the illusion of muscle failure, when the deeper issue lies upstream. Motor units, which consist of a motor neuron and the muscle fibers it controls, are the fundamental units of movement. With reduced use, these motor units become less responsive. Firing patterns lose synchronization, reaction time slow, and the ability to generate rapid or powerful contractions declines. These changes can occur subtly and gradually, often without noticeable muscle loss at first. The person feels weaker, less steady, or less confident, but medical imaging may show little change in muscle mass. This disconnect fuels a belief that weakness is mysterious or inevitable, when it is actually neurological in origin. Neural decline is not simply a consequence of age, but of reduced challenge. The nervous system, like muscle, adapts to demand. When movements become repetitive, predictable, and low effort, neural complexity decreases. The brain reduces investment in pathways that are no longer required to solve problems. Balance, coordination, and rapid force reduction are especially sensitive to this reduction. When these abilities fade, everyday movements feel harder, even if the muscles themselves have not significantly deteriorated. This process is often accelerated by modern lifestyles. Automation, comfort, and convenience remove the need for varied movement and rapid adaptation. Surfaces are flat, environment are controlled, and physical unpredictability is minimized. While this reduces injury risk in the short term, it deprives the nervous system of the stimuli it needs to maintain sharp motor control. Over time, the brain becomes less efficient at activating muscles, and the body interprets this inefficiency as weakness. Importantly, the nervous system remains adaptable throughout life. Neuroplasticity does not end with youth. New motor patterns can be learned, coordination can improve, and strength can increase when neural drive is restored. Resistance training, balance challenges, and skill-based movements stimulate not only muscle fibers, but the nervous system itself. They demand attention, timing, and force regulation, reawakening dormant pathways. This is why individuals often experience rapid strength gains early in training, even before muscles grow larger. The nervous system is relearning how to use existing tissue more effectively. Fear and caution further complicate neural involvement in weakness. When individuals are afraid of falling, injury, or pain, the brain subconsciously inhibits muscle activation as a protective strategy. This inhibition reduces force output and alters movement patterns, making actions feel unstable or weak. Over time, this protective suppression becomes habitual. Muscles are capable, but the nervous system no longer trusts them. The resulting weakness is not structural, but relational, a breakdown in confidence between brain and body. This neural component also explains why rest alone rarely restores strength. Extended rest may preserve muscle mass, but it does not challenge neural pathways. Without reactivation, coordination continues to decline. Movement quality deteriorates, and strength remains inaccessible. Recovery requires not just time, but re-engagement. The nervous system must be reminded how to send strong, precise signals, and muscles must be given opportunities to respond. Understanding weakness as a neural issue changes how it is addressed. Instead of focusing exclusively on muscle size or isolated exercises, attention shifts toward movement quality, intent, and complexity. Slow, controlled resistance, changes in speed, variations in load, and balance challenges all stimulate neural adaptation. These interventions restore communication rather than simply adding tissue. They help the brain rediscover its capacity to command the body effectively. This perspective also brings compassion into the conversation. When someone struggles with strength, it is not necessarily because they are physically incapable, but because their nervous system has adapted to a narrower range of demands. Blame dissolves when weakness is seen as a reversible adaptation rather than a personal failure. The body has not betrayed itself. It has simply followed instructions. As neural signaling improves, muscles often respond quickly. Strength increases feel sudden and surprising, reinforcing the idea that capacity was always present but inaccessible. This reawakening can restore confidence, independence, and trust in the body. It reveals that much of what we call aging is not loss of potential, but loss of communication. In the end, strength is a conversation between intention and execution. Muscles are the instruments, but the nervous system is a conductor. When the conductor becomes quiet, the orchestra falters, even if every instrument remains intact. Restoring strength, therefore, is not just about rebuilding muscle, but about teaching the brain to speak clearly again, so the body can once more respond with coordination, power, and purpose. The human body evolved in an environment where movement was unavoidable, varied, and deeply integrated into survival. Muscles were not trained in isolation, nor were they used in repetitive, limited ways. They climbed, carried, twisted, reached, stabilized, and reacted. In contrast, modern life has quietly stripped movement of its diversity. Chairs replace the need to squat, vehicles replace walking, machines replace lifting, and screens replace exploration. This shift has not merely reduced how much we move, but how we move, and the body responds to this change with remarkable fidelity. Muscle tissue does not deteriorate simply because activity decreases. It deteriorates because activity becomes incomplete. When movement patterns are narrow and predictable, large portions of the muscular system are underutilized. Stabilizing muscles lose relevance. Postural muscles become chronically inactive, and muscles responsible for power and rotation fade into dormancy. This selective disuse creates imbalances that compound over time, producing weakness not as a single event, but as a gradual redistribution of effort away from the body. Sedentary behavior is often misunderstood as the absence of exercise, but its true impact lies in prolonged stillness. Long periods of sitting signal the body that stability is no longer required, that balance can be outsourced to furniture, and that muscles can relax into passivity. Over hours, days, and years, these signals accumulate. Muscles adapt by reducing tone, responsiveness, and coordination. The body becomes efficient at stillness, not strength. Even individuals who exercise regularly are not immune to this effect if their daily movement remains limited. A short session of activity cannot fully counteract an entire day spent in constrained positions. Muscles respond to frequency more than intensity. When they are engaged briefly and then ignored for long stretches, the dominant signal remains inactivity. This is why weakness can develop even in people who consider themselves active. The body listens to the most consistent message. Repetitive movements further contribute to muscular decline by overemphasizing certain patterns while neglecting others. Walking on flat surfaces, sitting with hips flexed, typing, and driving all reinforce a narrow range of motion. Over time, muscles adapt to these positions by shortening, weakening, or losing coordination outside their habitual roles. The body becomes strong in limited contexts and fragile in unfamiliar ones. When a new demand arises, such as lifting an object awkwardly or recovering balance, the muscles lack the experience to respond effectively. This narrowing of movement reduces not only strength, but resilience. Muscles are designed to handle variability. They thrive on unpredictability, adjusting force and timing in response to changing conditions. When life becomes too predictable, muscles lose this adaptive edge. Weakness then appears not as a loss of raw power, but as an inability to respond when conditions change. The person feels unstable, hesitant, or fatigued, even though they may appear functional in routine tasks. Sedentary lifestyles also alter how the nervous system interacts with muscles. When movement is limited, the brain simplifies motor patterns to conserve energy. This simplification reduces coordination and precision. Muscles may still be present, but they are no longer recruited efficiently. The resulting weakness feels diffuse and unexplained, reinforcing the belief that something intrinsic has failed. In truth, the system has simply optimized for a world that demands very little from it. The tragedy of sedentary adaptation is its subtlety. It does not announce itself with sudden collapse, but with small accommodations. People lean more, step less, avoid effort unconsciously. Each adjustment seems reasonable in isolation, but together they reshape the body's expectations. Muscles are not damaged, they are dismissed. Over time, dismissal becomes decline. What makes this process particularly misleading is its association with age. As people grow older, their environments often become more restrictive. They sit more, move less, and are encouraged to be cautious. This coincidence creates the illusion that weakness is caused by aging, when it is actually caused by environmental narrowing. The body is responding appropriately to the life it is given. Reintroducing movement variety can reverse much of this decline. Muscles reawaken when asked to stabilize, rotate, reach, and adapt. Strength returns not only through resistance, but through complexity. Simple changes such as standing more, moving through full ranges, carrying uneven loads, and challenging balance restore relevance to dormant muscles. The body responds quickly when movement once again resembles the diversity it was designed for. Understanding sedentary behavior as a biological signal rather than a lifestyle flaw shifts the conversation. It removes moral judgment and focuses on design. Human bodies were not built for prolonged stillness, and when placed in such conditions, they adapt accordingly. Weakness becomes a predictable outcome, not a personal failure. When movement is reclaimed as a daily language rather than a scheduled task, muscles begin to remember their purpose. Strength becomes less about performance and more about participation. The body does not require extreme effort, only consistent engagement across varied contexts. In this way, muscle weakness reveals itself not as an inevitable companion of age, but as a reflection of how modern life has narrowed the conversation between body and environment. Hormones, nutrition, and inflammation are often invisible forces shaping muscle health. Yet they play roles as profound as movement itself. When people think of muscle weakness, they tend to focus on exercise and activity, overlooking these silent biological factors that accumulate influence over time. Hormones act as chemical messengers, coordinating growth, repair, and metabolism throughout the body. Testosterone, growth hormone, and insulin-like growth factor, for example, regulate protein synthesis and muscle fiber maintenance. When these hormones decline, as they naturally do with age or due to lifestyle and health conditions, muscle tissue is deprived of the signals that instruct it to grow, repair, and adapt. The result is not a sudden collapse, but a gradual, imperceptible erosion of resilience. Nutritional inputs are equally essential. Muscles require amino acids, vitamins, and minerals to sustain their structural and metabolic integrity. Protein is the most obvious example, serving as a building block for fibers and the substrate for repair. Inadequate protein intake slows synthesis, reduces recovery capacity, and contributes to atrophy over time. Micronutrients, including vitamin D, magnesium, and B vitamins, support energy metabolism and neuromuscular communication. Deficiencies are common in older adults due to changes in appetite, absorption, and food access, yet they silently amplify weakness, often mistaken as natural aging rather than a correctable deficit. Chronic inflammation, sometimes called inflammaging, further complicates this picture. Low-grade systemic inflammation subtly disrupts muscle function by altering protein turnover, impairing satellite cell activity, and increasing oxidative stress. It can result from obesity, sedentary lifestyle, poor diet, or underlying disease, yet its effects are gradual and easily misattributed to aging. Muscles under persistent inflammatory stress experience fatigue more quickly, recover more slowly, and lose strength more readily. These changes may appear inevitable, but they are often reversible with targeted interventions that reduce inflammation and restore proper metabolic signaling. The interaction between hormones, nutrition, and inflammation is intricate. For example, inadequate nutrition can exacerbate inflammation, which in turn impairs hormonal signaling. Hormonal imbalances can increase susceptibility to inflammatory responses, while inflammation can blunt nutrient absorption and utilization. Muscles exist within this network, responding to a constant flow of internal cues. When any one factor is disrupted, the consequences ripple outward, influencing strength, endurance, and coordination. What appears a simple weakness is in fact a multi-layered response to disrupted internal communication. Lifestyle choices magnify these effects. Diets low in protein or high in processed foods, chronic stress, insufficient sleep, and lack of movement all interact to compromise hormonal balance and elevate inflammation. The consequences accumulate gradually, often unnoticed until they manifest as functional weakness. By the time muscles visibly atrophy or a person feels less capable, the underlying causes have been shaping the tissue for years. This delayed recognition reinforces the myth that weakness is unavoidable with age, when in reality it has been driven by modifiable biological conditions. Scientific research consistently demonstrates the reversibility of these processes. Resistance training and adequate protein intake stimulate hormonal pathways that support muscle repair, even in older adults. Anti-inflammatory diets rich in fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, and micronutrients help restore metabolic balance and reduce cellular stress. Sleep, often overlooked, is a critical regulator of both hormones and inflammatory processes. These interventions do not merely slow decline. They actively restore muscle capacity, showing that weakness is not a fate written into our genes, but a response to modifiable internal and external conditions. Hormonal regulation is particularly powerful because it integrates multiple signals. Testosterone, for instance, influences muscle fiber size, neuromuscular efficiency, and energy metabolism simultaneously. Declines in testosterone do not simply reduce mass. They affect the speed and efficiency with which the nervous system activates muscle, the capacity for repair after minor damage, and the body's response to nutritional intake. Growth hormone has similar broad effects, supporting protein synthesis and mitochondrial function. When these hormones are supported through lifestyle, medical management, or strategic intervention, muscles often respond more dramatically than anticipated, highlighting their enduring adaptability. Inflammation operates as a hidden modifier of both neural and muscular systems. Chronic low-grade inflammation changes the chemical environment around muscle fibers, altering their ability to contract efficiently. It disrupts the repair signals from satellite cells and slows recovery from minor micro-tears that occur during daily activity or exercise. Even when exercise is performed, muscles under inflammatory stress do not respond as effectively, which can be misinterpreted as age-related unresponsiveness. Reducing inflammation through dietary adjustments, movement, and lifestyle changes can restore responsiveness, demonstrating the muscle's latent potential. Nutrition not only provides raw materials, but also acts as a signal. Protein-rich meals stimulate muscle protein synthesis and interact with hormonal pathways. Adequate intake of omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and micronutrients reduces inflammation and supports neuromuscular communication. The timing and composition of nutrition can influence muscle adaptation and recovery, showing that weakness is not a static condition, but a dynamic interplay of internal environment and external input. What becomes clear is that muscle weakness cannot be fully understood without considering the biochemical and physiological context in which muscles exist. Muscles do not act in isolation. They exist within a system regulated by hormones, nourished by nutrients, and shaped by the presence or absence of inflammation. When any of these factors are out of balance, strength diminishes, endurance falters, and recovery slows. When they are restored, muscles regain their capacity, revealing that weakness is often a reversible condition rather than an inevitable consequence of time. This perspective changes how weakness should be addressed. Interventions that target movement alone are insufficient if the hormonal environment is depleted, nutritional intake is inadequate, or inflammation is unchecked. Conversely, interventions that support hormones, reduce inflammation, and optimize nutrition amplify the effects of physical activity, producing meaningful gains in strength and function. Weakness is therefore not merely a reflection of muscles themselves, but a reflection of the body's internal ecosystem, which responds to care and neglect alike. Recognizing the biological underpinnings of muscle weakness also shifts responsibility from inevitability to opportunity. It reframes weakness as a symptom of imbalances rather than a verdict on aging. Individuals, healthcare providers, and society at large can influence hormonal health, nutrition, and inflammation through education, lifestyle design, and proactive intervention. Each factor is, meaning that what has been interpreted as a natural course of aging is, in many cases, a problem of overlooked internal conditions. Ultimately, muscle health is the product of an ongoing conversation between biological systems, lifestyle choices, and environmental exposures. Hormones, nutrition, and inflammation serve as messengers in this dialogue, guiding how muscles grow, adapt, and respond. When the conversation is disrupted, weakness appears. When the dialogue is restored, muscles respond with remarkable fidelity, demonstrating resilience and adaptability that contradict the assumption of inevitability. Understanding these forces illuminates a powerful truth. Muscle weakness is rarely an unavoidable fate, but a signal that the body requires attention, nourishment, and balanced. Muscle weakness is often framed as a natural companion to aging, something that simply accompanies the passage of time. Yet this perspective overlooks a crucial truth. Weakness is frequently a reflection of disrupted communication between the brain, the nervous system, and the muscle fibers themselves rather than a straightforward loss of tissue. The body is a network of signals, and muscles act in response to information they receive from neurons, chemical messengers, and sensory feedback. When this network falters, muscles cannot respond effectively, no matter how intact they may appear. The origin of weakness is often hidden upstream, where the nervous system determines which fibers are activated, how force is distributed, and how timing is coordinated. The failure is rarely in the muscle itself, but in the orchestration of movement. Motor neurons serve as a conduit between intention and action. Each motor neuron connects to a specific group of muscle fibers, forming a motor unit. The nervous system controls the recruitment of these motor units depending on the strength and precision required for a given movement. In healthy, active individuals, recruitment is efficient and adaptable, allowing for smooth, coordinated, and powerful motion. However, when activity decreases, motor units are not consistently stimulated. The connections between neurons and muscle fibers weaken, firing patterns become less synchronized, and the speed of signal transmission slows. The muscle, though structurally capable, cannot respond with full strength because the instructions it receives are incomplete or inconsistent. This phenomenon is amplified by age-related changes in the nervous system, but it is important to recognize that age alone is not the cause. Neurons may die, pathways may become less efficient, and synaptic connections may degrade, but these changes are often accelerated by lack of movement, poor coordination, or limited challenge to the nervous system. The brain is highly plastic. It adapts to what is demanded of it. When life becomes more sedentary or repetitive, the nervous system reallocates resources to match reduced needs. As a result, neural engagement with muscles diminishes, leaving them underutilized even when they are structurally sound. Balance and coordination provide a clear illustration of how disrupted communication affects strength. Weakness is not simply about inability to lift weight or generate force. It is also about timing, stability, and precision. Falls, stumbles, and missteps are often neurological in origin rather than purely muscular. The nervous system integrates input from visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems to control posture and movement. When these integrations weaken, muscles are activated too slowly, too weakly, or in the wrong sequence, creating functional weakness. The body may have ample strength in theory, yet the inability to use it effectively creates the lived experience of frailty. Fear and anticipation also interact with the nervous system to influence muscle activation. When people anticipate injury or are cautious due to prior falls, the brain can inhibit full recruitment of motor units as protective strategy. This neural inhibition reduces force production and alters movement patterns, creating a cycle in which muscles are underutilized and coordination declines further. Over time, the nervous system becomes conditioned to restrain effort, and muscles respond accordingly. The weakening is therefore relational. It reflects a trust or lack thereof between brain and body rather than a deficit in tissue. Neuromuscular junctions, the connection points where neurons transmit signals to muscle fibers, also degrade under conditions of inactivity or chronic disease. Signal transmission becomes less reliable, and muscle fibers may partially disconnect from the nervous system. These changes are not irreversible, but they require stimulation to restore function. Exercise that challenges coordination, speed, and variability directly engages these junctions, prompting reorganization, improved synaptic efficiency, and reestablishment of functional connections. Even after periods of prolonged inactivity, muscles can regain responsiveness once communication pathways are retrained. Sensory feedback plays a critical role in maintaining strength and movement precision. Proprioceptors embedded in muscles and tendons inform the brain about limb position, tension, and load. When movement is limited or repetitive, these senses become less sensitive, and the nervous system receives diminished information. The body reacts by reducing output, appearing weak or unsteady. Reintroducing varied, intentional movements enhances sensory input, improves feedback, and strengthens a functional connection between nervous system and muscle. Weakness, in this context, is a symptom of an underinformed system rather than a structural deficit. The concept of disuse is central to understanding neuromuscular weakness. Muscles are capable of responding to signals, but if signals are infrequent or incomplete, the potential for strength remains dormant. The nervous system adapts to patterns of inactivity, simplifying firing strategies and reducing the number of active motor units. This adaptation conserves energy but compromises force production. The body becomes efficient at performing limited tasks, yet vulnerable when demands exceed the reduced neural capacity. Weakness emerges not from inevitable decline, but from selective underuse and adaptation to a constrained environment. Rehabilitation, and training highlight the reversibility of this form of weakness. Targeted interventions such as resistance exercise, balance challenges, and skill-based activities stimulate neural pathways alongside muscle fibers. Early gains in strength often occur through improved neural efficiency before significant hypertrophy takes place, illustrating the importance of communication between the nervous system and muscle. Coordination, timing, and recruitment patterns improve, allowing muscles to respond effectively. The process underscores that much of what is perceived as muscle weakness is actually a temporary failure of signaling, not an irreversible loss of tissue. Understanding weakness as a neuromuscular issue also reframes expectations. It removes the fatalistic notion that aging necessarily diminishes strength, and instead positions the nervous system as a modifiable factor. Interventions that emphasize varied movement, complexity, and engagement can restore function even in later decades. Weakness becomes a message that the system requires stimulation rather than a verdict of biological inevitability. The body demonstrates remarkable capacity to relearn, reorganize, and regain efficiency when given the right conditions. This perspective has broader implications for health and independence. Functional strength depends on the integrated performance of muscles and the nervous system. When communication falters, the risk of falls, injury, and loss of autonomy increases. By addressing the neurological component of weakness, individuals can preserve mobility, maintain confidence in movement, and prevent downstream consequences of frailty. Strength training becomes not only a physical intervention, but a neurological exercise, restoring the dialogue that allows muscles to function at their full potential. Ultimately, muscle weakness is rarely a singular problem of tissue degradation. It is a systemic issue arising from the complex interplay between neural signals, motor unit recruitment, sensory feedback, and cognitive factors, such as fear and expectation. Muscles may retain structural integrity, yet without precise and consistent neural input, they cannot express their capacity. Rebuilding strength, therefore, requires attention to both the body and the nervous system. By engaging the brain, refining communication, and retraining motor patterns, the body can restore force, coordination, and responsiveness, revealing that weakness is often a reversible state contingent on the quality of neuromuscular dialogue, rather than an inevitable consequence of reframing muscle weakness as a reversible condition transforms the way we think about aging, independence, and human potential. For too long, society has accepted the gradual loss of strength as inevitable, a natural consequence of time. This assumption is deeply ingrained, influencing healthcare, personal behavior, and cultural expectations. Yet when we examine the evidence, a different narrative emerges, one in which weakness is not a sentence handed down by age, but a message from the body that conditions can be improved, that signals can be restored, and that strength is always within reach when the right interventions are applied. Understanding weakness as modifiable restores agency and dignity to individuals, showing that the trajectory of human function is not fixed, but shaped by choices, environment, and care. The concept of reversibility is rooted in the biological properties of muscle tissue itself. Skeletal muscle is remarkably plastic, capable of adapting to stress, repairing microdamage, and increasing its capacity in response to stimulus at almost any stage of life. Fiber types can shift in proportion, mitochondria can increase in number and efficiency, and satellite cells remain ready to repair and grow tissue long after early adulthood. What is often interpreted as inevitable decline is frequently a reflection of reduced stimulus, suboptimal nutrition, hormonal shifts, or neurological inefficiency. When these factors are addressed, strength, coordination, and endurance can improve dramatically, demonstrating that weakness is often a state of underutilization rather than permanent loss. Reversibility is also psychological and functional. Viewing weakness as modifiable restores confidence and encourages engagement. Individuals who believe that loss of strength is inevitable are less likely to move, less likely to challenge themselves, and more likely to adopt a sedentary lifestyle. This avoidance further accelerates decline, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. By reframing weakness as reversible, motivation and self-efficacy are restored. People begin to see effort as meaningful, small improvements as evidence of capacity, and challenges as opportunity for growth rather than risks of failure. This mental shift has profound effects on adherence to exercise, lifestyle modification, and long-term functional independence.